She walked in smiling, unaware the next few minutes would shatter her world. Within seconds, Princess Catherine's calm exterior collapsed, tears streaming down her face as doctors delivered a truth no mother should hear about their child. Why was this test hidden until now? Why was the palace caught off guard? And what does this mean for Prince Louis and the monarchy? Before we continue, please kindly subscribe. We are on a journey to reach 1,000 subscribers in no distant time, and we're counting on you. Like, comment, and hit on the notification bell. It began as an ordinary summons, the kind Catherine had answered countless times before. A quiet request, a polite tone, no warning, no urgency. Yet something about the timing felt wrong, like the air itself had shifted before she even crossed the threshold. Palace corridors had a way of whispering before they spoke. And this time the silence was deafening. Inside, the atmosphere was clinical, restrained, and far too serious for what she had been told were routine matters. Louis had undergone assessments, yes, but reassured as precautionary developmental check-ins, standard monitoring, nothing that demanded alarm, or so she believed. But the faces across from her told a different story. Tight expressions, measured pauses, words chosen with surgical care. Then came the language no parent is prepared for. Terms that sounded final, phrases that carried weight. Doctors didn't speculate. They didn't soften. They spoke as if the conclusion had been reached long ago, as if this moment had simply been delayed, not discovered. And that delay was what broke her. The realization that something this serious had been unfolding quietly behind reassurances, behind protocol. Catherine's composure cracked, not gently, completely. Insiders would later describe the sound of a chair scraping back, a sharp intake of breath, hands trembling as reality set in. This wasn't confusion. This was shock colliding with guilt. The kind that asks impossible questions. How did I miss this? Who knew before me? Why now? Within minutes, the palace machines sprang into action. Phones went silent. Internal channels locked down. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Orders were issued without explanation. Aides moved fast, not to comfort, but to contain. Contain information. Contain reaction. Contain Catherine herself, as she was ushered away from prying eyes. Witnesses say she disappeared down a private corridor, face pale, eyes red, the weight of something irreversible settling on her shoulders. Staff were instructed not to speak, not to speculate, not to remember what they had seen, music, because whatever had just been revealed was not meant to travel beyond those walls. But secrets have a way of leaking through cracks no one notices at first. And while Catherine was left alone with the kind of fear that rewrites a mother's world, the palace was already bracing for impact, knowing this moment could not stay buried forever. But to truly understand the weight of this moment, we must go back to the symptoms no one noticed and the signs the palace tried to ignore. He was the palace's playful light. But behind Louis' cheeky grin were subtle signs missed by many, ignored by some, and dismissed as just a phase. Now those symptoms look terrifying in hindsight. What were the clues and who buried them? It started with little things, barely noticeable at first. A delay in forming words, moments where his coordination faltered, quiet pauses during play that once seemed like imagination, but now raise alarm. The royal calendar moved fast, filled with appearances, engagements, music, staged photo ops, and Prince Louis was expected to smile on cue. But behind those carefully curated images were moments of confusion, hesitation, and a quiet that no one wanted to name. At events, staff began to notice how quickly Louis would tire. A few minutes of waving, then clinging to Catherine's hand, visibly drained. Clips surfaced online of him zoning out during ceremonies, blinking slowly, detached. Fans called it adorable. Commentators said he was simply overwhelmed, but some insiders began whispering. Something didn't feel right. It was the nanny who first voiced it aloud, softly, carefully to a senior aide. She'd seen other children grow. Louis was different, Music she noted how he struggled with instructions, how his balance wavered, how he often froze when overstimulated. She wasn't suggesting panic, just concern. But concern music in the royal machine can be dangerous. Catherine heard it. She felt it long before she was told. A mother always does. The connection she had with Louis was strong, unspoken, and it told her something was wrong. But every time she raised it, music, every time her voice trembled in worry, she was met with tight smiles and clipped reassurances. Boys developed differently, they said. Music, he's under a spotlight, they added. He just needs time. But it wasn't time she feared. It was what they were wasting time ignoring. Family videos once filled with joy now played back like tragic omens. That birthday clip where Louis didn't respond to his name. The garden photo where he stared off, expression blank for seconds too long. Catherine began reviewing them over and over, looking for patterns, begging for a misinterpretation. But the truth was only becoming clearer. Specialists had already been contacted quietly, discreetly. Princess Catherine wanted certainty, not tabloid speculation, not protocol, but answers. The tests were ordered, but somewhere between the request and the execution, they were stalled. Someone in the palace had pressed pause deliberately. The reasoning was predictable. Optics, timing, privacy, but the cost unforgivable. Louis was slipping through the cracks of an institution too concerned with image to protect its own. And the woman who had always towed the line, who had learned to survive with grace in the tight grip of royal duty, was beginning to break that silence. And just when Catherine began demanding answers, palace politics took over, igniting a battle that would pit a mother's instincts against royal tradition. She begged for clarity. They gave her protocol. Behind the palace's gilded walls, Catherine's quiet pleas were stonewalled by advisors loyal not to her, but to the crown. What secrets were they protecting? And how far did they go to delay the truth? In the days that followed the initial diagnosis, Catherine found herself not at war with an illness, but with an institution. She wasn't asking for headlines or headlines. She was asking for second opinions, for additional consultations with leading specialists beyond the ones handpicked by the palace. But the answer each time was no, not yet, not necessary, not advisable, and beneath every carefully worded denial was the same message. Wait, be quiet, stay in line. Advisors insisted on caution. They called the findings preliminary. They emphasized that nothing was confirmed, that going outside palace channels could cause unnecessary concern, that any misstep might spark a media frenzy. But to Catherine, it felt like something far more sinister: containment. The truth was not being examined, it was being managed. Every attempt she made to seek more music, clarity was met with deflection, delay, or bureaucratic coldness. It wasn't just indifference, it was calculated resistance. Tension quickly rose between Catherine and her own private secretary, a figure long thought to be one of her closest allies. Sources say she confronted him late one evening, her voice low but shaking with rage. "Why are you protecting the institution and not my son?" No answer came that satisfied her, because there was no answer that could. William, ever the emblem of composure, found himself cornered. He was both a father and a future king. A man deeply in love with his wife, yet raised to serve something bigger than himself. Catherine leaned on him for support, but insiders claim his stance was often cautious, torn. He urged patience. He asked for faith in the process, but the process was suffocating her. Charles had been informed, briefed with precision, and yet his response was reportedly dismissive, even clinical. He spoke of duty, of narrative, of legacy. Not once, Catherine allegedly noted, did he say the word Louis to her that omission said everything. And then in the shadows, Camilla moved. She didn't speak publicly. She didn't need to. Her influence flowed behind the scenes, subtle but decisive. It was Camilla's people, many believe, who advised against further testing, who framed Catherine's concerns as emotional overreactions, who suggested quietly, that the future queen was becoming difficult to manage. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs shaped decisions. Catherine wasn't just being ignored, she was being silenced. Her instincts, her voice, her maternal authority all diminished under the weight of tradition and control, and every door she knocked on closed a little faster. She wasn't battling for answers anymore. She was battling for the right to ask questions at all, yet secrets can only be buried for so long. And when the leak finally came, it didn't trickle. It detonated. It wasn't meant to get out, but one encrypted message changed everything. A leak from deep inside the palace medical wing, anonymous, chilling, and undeniably real, set the royal media ablaze. Who leaked it and why now? The message arrived without warning. A single encrypted email sent to a veteran journalist known for breaking the stories others wouldn't touch. At first glance, it seemed implausible, too intimate, music, too sensitive, too dangerous to be real. But within that file were details that only a handful of people inside the palace walls could have known. Medical terminology, dates, observations, specifics so precise, so disturbingly accurate that the journalist didn't hesitate. The story was too explosive to sit on. Within hours, a firestorm erupted. The email included what appeared to be an internal palace memo. Cold, clinical, music, and devastating. It outlined a diagnosis that had never been publicly acknowledged, referenced internal disagreements about disclosing the results, and most damningly, it revealed that the findings had been known for weeks. The implications were catastrophic. Not just a medical crisis, but a betrayal. Not just a child in peril, but a system built on secrecy cracking from within. The palace media team went into full-scale panic. Communications were frozen. Emergency meetings were called. Damage control wasn't just necessary, it was already late. The leak had jumped containment and now had a life of its own. News outlets picked it up at lightning speed. Headlines screamed speculation. Experts weighed in on the condition without confirmation. And across the world, a hashtag surged into trending territory, #Pray for Louis. The public, blindsided and heartbroken, demanded answers, but the palace had none to give. Music, not yet. Catherine found out not from her aides, not from her husband, but from her phone. A notification flashing a headline she hadn't authorized, music, hadn't prepared for, hadn't even been warned about. Insiders say she was furious, not at the journalist, not even at the leak, but at the silence that had forced someone to act from the shadows. At the institution that had made desperation the only way to reveal the truth. And then the whispers began. Who had done it? Was it someone close to Catherine, or someone trying to sabotage her from within? Some suggested it was an act of rebellion. Others whispered about intentional sabotage, a calculated move to create chaos. Names were floated, staff were interrogated, loyalty was questioned behind locked doors. But the leak had done more than expose a condition. It had exposed a lie. It had torn through the polished veneer the palace had spent decades crafting. And it had placed Catherine at the center of a storm that no spin doctor could control. But even amidst the chaos, one truth loomed larger than all the rest: the test result itself. And the devastating reality it revealed. This wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a bombshell that would reshape the royal line, shake the public, and haunt Catherine forever. When the words left the doctor's mouth, the air left the room. What does this mean for Louis and the future of the monarchy? The leaked report confirmed what Catherine had feared, but its contents went even further. The condition was rare, neurological, progressive, a genetic anomaly that had evaded early detection, yet now presented symptoms that no one could deny. Doctors described it with sterile detachment. But the implications behind their words were anything but cold. There was no cure, only management, and no guarantee of normally, just years of uncertainty. The prognosis was cautious but grim. Louis would face challenges that would evolve with time. Speech, motor skills, cognitive development, every milestone would be a battle. There might be days of progress, but there would also be regression. The future would not be predictable. Not for him, not for the family, and certainly not for the monarchy that once expected him to someday stand beside his brother on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to a sea of devoted subjects. Inside the palace, the fallout was immediate. Advisors scrambled, not out of empathy, but self-preservation. Conversations were no longer about care, they were about consequence. If Louis was no longer a viable heir, what would that mean for public image, for succession, for the illusion of stability the monarchy worked so hard to maintain? Plans had to be redrawn, messaging had to be rewritten, and somewhere in the middle of it all stood a mother shattered. Insiders say Catherine collapsed upon hearing the full explanation. It wasn't quiet, it wasn't composed, it was primal. She reportedly screamed, sobbed, clutched at her chest as if trying to rip the pain out by force. One source recalled her words, seared into memory. Not Louis, anyone but him. The heartbreak was total. And yet, even in her agony, there was no pause in the palace machinery. The crown didn't wait. The calendar didn't shift. The walls didn't care. William's reaction, by contrast, music, was rage. Not at Catherine, not even at fate, but at himself, at the palace, at the advisors who told him it was under control, at the voices who urged patience when the evidence demanded urgency. Guilt consumed him. He had trusted too easily, believed the polished briefings, looked past the moments that now haunted him in slow-motion memory. For the first time, William saw the institution not as a legacy to inherit, but as a machine capable of sacrificing its own, and that machine had failed their son. The diagnosis marked the beginning of a new reality. Louis would need care, constant, evolving, and deeply personal. Royal duties, public expectations, all of that would need to be reconsidered, rewritten, perhaps abandoned altogether. Because the boy who once stood proudly on the palace balcony now faced a life that would unfold away from the spotlight in therapies and hospitals, not in ceremonies and coronations. And yet, as Catherine mourned what might have been, others were already circling the throne with quiet ambition. But as Catherine grieved, others schemed because power in the royal court never sleeps. As Catherine mourned, Camilla maneuvered. Sources say she saw Louis' diagnosis not as a tragedy, but as a clearance. A power vacuum was forming, and Camilla was ready to exploit it. But at what cost? While the palace publicly projected a stance of unity, behind closed doors, fault lines were cracking wide open. And in the center of that quiet fracture stood Camilla, composed, calculating, and curiously unmoved. Insiders reported that upon hearing of Louis' diagnosis, her reaction was far from emotional. One aide allegedly quoted her exact words, "It's regrettable but clarifying to her. This wasn't grief." It was a reshuffling, the kind that opens doors for those patient enough to wait. Almost immediately, discussions began shifting behind Catherine's back. Advisors aligned with Camilla began floating a new idea music, that Princess Charlotte should now be fast-tracked, that the line of duty must remain intact. And if Louis was no longer viable, adjustments had to be made swiftly, efficiently. The tone was professional, cold. There was no space for empathy, only optics and continuity. Camilla's camp wasn't wasting time mourning, they were mobilizing. Meetings began happening. Small, informal music, but purposeful, and Catherine wasn't invited. One particularly jarring report described Camilla convening a quiet gathering in the private wing without Catherine's knowledge, where advisors discussed media narratives, future roles, and succession optics. No mother, no wife, just power and politics. When Catherine found out, she was livid. Tensions between the two women, long buried under the surface, finally erupted. Catherine, still reeling from her son's condition, confronted Camilla not with decorum, but with fury. Sources say she demanded transparency, respect, inclusion. Camilla reportedly responded with ice. The monarchy must endure. It wasn't personal. She insisted it was about survival. But for Catherine, the message was clear. Her grief was inconvenient, her silence was expected. Charles, once seen as the fragile center of royal unity, remained disturbingly passive. He refused to intervene. Those close to the situation claimed he justified his inaction as stability through neutrality. But others saw it as cowardice, a failure to protect his son, his grandson, or the woman his family once begged the nation to accept as their future queen. William, watching this unfold, began to change. The bond he once attempted to maintain with his stepmother began to erode. He witnessed the quiet machinations. He heard the whispers, and as his loyalty to his father wavered, his disgust for palace politics deepened. His wife was being sidelined. His son was being erased. And now he was watching Camilla take steps toward a future that did not include Louis at all. But Catherine wasn't about to sit silently, not anymore. And what she did next would stun even her closest allies. Music she was expected to fade into grief. Instead, Catherine rose like fire. Her next move wasn't royal. It was maternal, primal, and unstoppable. In a single stroke, she rewrote the palace's narrative, forcing the crown to follow her lead. The palace wanted silence, but what they got was a roar. Just days after being pushed aside, after being excluded from decisions concerning her own son, Catherine acted with a clarity and fury no one saw coming. Without warning, without consultation, and entirely outside royal protocol, she published a statement. Not through the palace, not with approval, but directly raw and unfiltered to the people. The message was brief, but it was seismic. Louis is not broken. He is ours, and we will not be silent. Those 12 words cracked the facade. Music, for the first time in modern royal history, a senior member of the firm bypassed the institution's iron grip and spoke straight to the world, not as a duchess, not as a future queen, but as a mother. It wasn't diplomacy, it was defiance, and it struck like lightning. The public response was instant. The statement went viral within hours. Millions reposted her words. News channels were forced to rewrite their headlines. Journalists praised the honesty. Celebrities shared their support. And outside the gates of the palace, something extraordinary happened. Flowers arrived, thousands of them. Cards, drawings, prayers, messages scrolled by children and mothers and strangers alike. Not just sympathy, but solidarity. And with the outpouring came outrage. The public demanded to know why the palace had stayed silent, why Catherine had been left to speak alone, why the monarchy had failed to protect a 5-year-old child from internal sabotage and media manipulation. Hashtags trended, op-eds surged. The story was no longer about a diagnosis. It was about a cover-up, and Catherine had exposed it. William, already disillusioned by the games being played behind palace doors, made a choice. For the first time, he publicly aligned himself not with the institution, but with his wife. He reposted her message. He added 3 words of his own. "We stand together." Those words sent shock waves through royal circles. The future king had taken a side, and it wasn't the crown's. Within palace walls, the atmosphere turned volatile. Charles was no longer shielded by neutrality. He was forced into the light, pushed to either back Camilla's quiet strategy or support Catherine's very public revolution. But his hesitation only worsened the fracture. While he lingered in indecision, palace aides began splintering into factions. One source described it as a war without swords, but with consequences. Amidst the storm, Catherine kept moving. She didn't just defend Louis, she began redefining him. No longer the fragile prince tucked away from sight, Louis would become something else. Not an heir, not a royal symbol, but a beacon. Catherine reached out to specialists, charities, advocacy groups, plans formed to launch a new initiative focused on children with neurological conditions. This wouldn't be about titles. It would be about truth, about visibility, about strength in vulnerability. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't playing by the rules. She was rewriting them. But Catherine's stand came with a price. And the next betrayal would come from someone she never expected. The leak didn't just damage the palace, it shattered trust. And when the mole was finally unmasked, Catherine was left speechless. Someone close to her, someone she trusted with Louis's life, had sold her pain for headlines. The investigation moved quietly at first. No one wanted to admit just how deep the betrayal might run. Cybersecurity teams were brought in discreetly, messages traced, call logs examined. The pressure came not only from the palace, but from Catherine herself, demanding to know how something so intimate, so devastating, had been delivered to the press with surgical precision. And then a name surfaced, one she never expected. The source of the leak, a longtime aide, not just a member of staff, but a fixture in Catherine's daily life. Someone who had been there for years through pregnancies, through tears, through Louis's early milestones. Someone who had once rocked him to sleep. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal, it was brutal. What followed was even more horrifying. Financial records exposed a series of discrete payments from an overseas shell company music. Money that traced back to a media group long rumored to have connections with Camilla's camp. The suggestion wasn't subtle. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had bought access to Catherine's grief, not for truth, for control. When she was told, Catherine reportedly collapsed. Not dramatically, not for show, but from the sheer emotional weight of it all. Her voice, insiders said, cracked as she whispered the words no one ever thought they'd hear from her. I had no one left. In that moment, it wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was the disintegration of a safe space. The realization that even the people she held closest had their price. The aide was arrested, removed. Statements were issued, but the damage couldn't be reversed, and the public, watching from the outside, saw through the palace's sterile response. They didn't see scandal, they saw sabotage. Loyalty to the monarchy began to fracture. People didn't want carefully worded palace press releases anymore. They wanted accountability. They wanted justice, and above all, they wanted Catherine to rise. And rise she did. Though gutted, Catherine didn't retreat. She began cutting ties, quietly, removing lingering loyalties from her inner circle. No fanfare, no headlines, just silence and strategy. She vowed never again to be caught off guard. She vowed to rebuild her world brick by brick, this time on her own terms. No more smiling for tradition, no more asking for permission. She had learned the cost of silence. And now she was done paying it. And as the dust settles, one final question remains. What future awaits Prince Louis? He may never wear a crown, but he will define a generation. In the shadows of grief and betrayal, a new path emerges for Louis, for Catherine, and for the monarchy itself. But the road ahead is anything but certain. In the aftermath of the storm, Catherine made a choice. Not to retreat, not to repair, but to rebuild. And this time, not just for herself, for every child who had been overlooked, misdiagnosed, or pushed into the margins. She launched a foundation quietly at first, but with purpose. Music, its mission was clear: to create resources, education, and emotional support for families facing the same kind of diagnosis that had upended her own world. It bore Louis's name, music, not as a symbol of fragility, but of fierce resilience. This was no vanity project. Catherine threw herself into it with the full force of her grief, her rage, and her clarity. The foundation wasn't a side effort. It was her war, a war against silence, against stigma music, against the system that told her to smile while her child suffered behind closed doors. And the world responded. Donations poured in. Parents wrote letters. Doctors offered to collaborate. The palace, once hesitant, found itself forced to acknowledge something it had tried to suppress. That compassion, not protocol, was what the people were now demanding. Meanwhile, Louis, protected, but no longer hidden, began his own quiet journey. Catherine made the bold decision to share glimpses of his therapy, of his progress, of his struggle, not in full detail, but enough to spark awareness, to humanize a young boy once destined to be a footnote. Music, Louis' presence began redefining what it meant to be royal. Not perfect, not scripted, but real. His bravery, his vulnerability became a symbol not of weakness, but of strength. And in this transformation, William and Catherine became unshakable, united, no longer playing by palace rules, no longer bending to tradition. Their partnership, forged in the agony of truth, was now rooted in something far more powerful than ceremony. They stood not just as heirs to a throne, but as parents fighting for change. And in doing so, they earned something no title could guarantee: the unwavering loyalty of the people. Charles, meanwhile, faded into the backdrop of his own monarchy. His silence during the scandal, his refusal to take a side, left a lasting scar. Approval ratings dropped, public sympathy cooled. Where once he had commanded quiet respect, he now stood accused of cowardice. Camilla, too, found herself increasingly isolated, her influence waning under the weight of a narrative she couldn't control. But Catherine rose, not by decree, not by inheritance, but by heart. She became the voice of a new generation of royals, one shaped not by diamonds and duty, but by devotion and defiance. The monarchy, once a symbol of unattainable perfection, began to evolve. And it was Catherine, not Charles, who led that evolution, not with authority, but with authenticity. Louis may never sit on the throne, but his story, his journey has already reshaped the palace from within. He exposed the cracks, and through those cracks, something unexpected bloomed: truth. And though the palace walls may still guard their secrets, Catherine has already won the people's hearts. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share our videos.